My husband's boss pulled me aside and whispered this shocking secret. You'll be speechless. Don't forget to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Life has a way of orchestrating the most profound shifts amidst the mundane, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary with a subtle, almost imperceptible twist of fate. I never imagined that a quiet Wednesday afternoon, spent idly sipping tea while awaiting Robert's return, would become the catalyst for an upheaval that would redefine everything I thought I knew. My name is Evelyn, and at 62, I had cultivated a life of gentle rhythms in a tranquil town nestled just outside the bustling cityscape of Denver. My marriage to Robert, a steadfast and wonderful man, spanned over 35 years, a tapestry woven with the threads of raising two cherished children, weathering our fair share of life's inevitable crests and troughs, and settling into a comfortable, predictable cadence, or so I had believed. Robert, a man of unwavering loyalty and diligent work ethic, had dedicated the past decade to a reputable local marketing firm. His superior, Daniel Hawthorne, a man in his early 50s, possessed a charismatic aura and an undeniable air of authority that commanded attention. I had encountered Daniel on several occasions, at various company events, always impeccably smooth, polished, the epitome of professionalism. But on this particular afternoon, the familiar script of my life took an unforeseen, dramatic turn. I had spent the day volunteering at a local charity event, my energy pleasantly depleted by the fulfilling work. Robert, as was his routine, arrived to pick me up around 3:30. As we drove home, a disquieting silence filled the car. Robert seemed unusually withdrawn, his thoughts clearly tethered to some unseen preoccupation. He wore that familiar distant look in his eyes, the telltale sign that something weighed heavily on his mind, yet remained unspoken, shielded behind a wall of internal deliberation. Upon arriving home, I was eager to unwind, to sink into the comforting embrace of my favorite armchair. I had just settled in, the warmth of a steaming cup of tea seeping into my weary bones, when the insistent shrill of the phone pierced the afternoon calm. It was Robert's work phone, a device I rarely answered. Yet, on that particular day, an inexplicable intuition, a subtle nudge of premonition, compelled me to pick it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady despite the burgeoning curiosity. "Miss Evelyn?" The voice on the other end was Daniel's, smooth and controlled, yet with an undercurrent of something deeper, something I couldn't quite decipher. "Daniel Hawthorne here. I apologize for bothering you, but I need to speak with you privately. Is this a convenient time?" I was taken aback. Daniel had never called me directly before, at least not without Robert being present. I glanced over at my husband, who was pacing restlessly near the window, his back to me, seemingly lost in his own thoughts, oblivious to the ringing phone and the unexpected caller. "Yes, of course," I replied, feeling an inexplicable tension tightening its grip around my chest. "What's going on?" "I'd rather not discuss this over the phone, Evelyn," Daniel said, his tone lowered, imbued with a sense of urgency. "It's something I need to convey in person. I can be at your house in 30 minutes, if that would be all right." My mind raced, a whirlwind of speculation and growing unease. Why would Daniel, Robert's charismatic boss, need to speak with me in private? I glanced at Robert again, still lost in his internal landscape, unaware of the unsettling conversation I was having. "Sure," I managed to say, striving for a semblance of calm. "We'll be here." As soon as I hung up, a knot of apprehension settled in my stomach. What could Daniel possibly need to tell me that warranted such secrecy, such an unusual request? My heart beat a little faster as I desperately tried to rationalize the situation, to convince myself that it was merely a work-related matter, a minor issue that had nothing to do with me personally. But the insistent question lingered: why the need for privacy? Why me? Approximately 25 minutes later, a soft, polite knock echoed through our quiet house. Robert, still seemingly preoccupied, hadn't noticed the arrival. I rose and answered the door, my senses heightened with a nervous anticipation. Standing before me was Daniel, as impeccably polished as ever in a dark suit, but there was an undeniable tension about him today, a subtle vulnerability that belied his usual confident demeanor. "Mrs. Evelyn," he greeted me with a warm but undeniably strained smile, his dark eyes betraying a hint of hesitation. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with me." I nodded, stepping aside to allow him entry. Please come in. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you, Daniel replied quickly, his voice quiet but deliberate. I appreciate it, but there's something I need to get off my chest, and I don't want to waste any time. I led him into the living room, the familiar comfort of the space now charged with an unspoken anticipation. We both sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the expanse of fabric between us mirroring the growing chasm of unease. Daniel's usual smooth charm was conspicuously absent, replaced by a raw intensity I had never witnessed before. His eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence thick with unspoken words. Evelyn, Daniel began, his voice low and carefully controlled, I'm going to tell you something. But you need to promise me that you won't tell Robert. Not yet. My heart skipped a beat, the weight of his request settling heavily upon me. What could be so serious, so potentially damaging, that it required such immediate secrecy? I nodded slowly, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my gaze fixed on his, waiting for him to continue. The tension in the room seemed to solidify, each passing second stretching into an eternity. It's about Robert, Daniel said, his gaze never leaving mine, his voice barely a whisper. Something I've been keeping from him. And from you. I took a deep breath, striving to maintain a semblance of calm, but I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, suffocating my composure. Robert. What could Daniel possibly know about Robert that I, his wife of over 3 decades, didn't? I've been having an affair with someone at work, Daniel confessed, the words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud, the silence that followed thick with disbelief and a dawning sense of dread. My breath caught in my throat, a silent gasp of shock. A few months ago, things changed between us, and I didn't know how to handle it. I still don't. My pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden stillness. My mind reeled, desperately trying to process the enormity of Daniel's confession. An affair. I repeated the word silently, the reality feeling both surreal and devastating. With who? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper, betraying the tremor that ran through me. Daniel hesitated, his eyes flicking away for a fleeting moment as if choosing his words with excruciating care. I can't tell you yet, he said finally, his voice low and strained. But what I can tell you is that it's someone close to Robert. Someone who you would never expect. The room felt suddenly colder, the afternoon light casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. I couldn't help but glance towards the hallway, the direction of the den where Robert was still lost in his own thoughts, completely unaware of the seismic confession that had just shattered the fragile peace of our home. How long had Daniel been carrying this secret, this betrayal? And why, of all people, had he chosen to confide in me? What did he possibly want from me? I sat there, speechless, lost in the bewildering whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. What had I just learned? Why was Daniel, my husband's boss, a man I barely knew, unburdening himself to me with such a destructive secret? I looked back at him, trying to decipher the emotions etched on his face, to understand the motivation behind this shocking revelation. His eyes were filled with a palpable guilt, but there was something else there too, a raw sense of desperation that unsettled me. I never wanted to hurt Robert, Evelyn, Daniel continued, his voice thick with a regret that seemed genuine. But I need your help. I don't know what to do. This is all so complicated, and I've made a terrible mess of things. His words hit me like a sudden storm, leaving me feeling overwhelmed, confused, yet a part of me, a strange, detached observer, recognized the raw human pain beneath the veneer of his professional composure. It wasn't just about the act of betrayal, it was about the intricate, often tangled web of relationships we all navigate, often finding ourselves ensnared without even realizing the subtle shifts that have occurred. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging heavy in the charged air. Why now? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes pleading with me for some semblance of understanding. Because I don't want to hurt Robert. But I don't know how to fix this. And you. You're the only person I trust to help me find a way through this. I could feel the weight of his words, the gravity of the situation, sinking in like an anchor dragging me down into a murky abyss. This wasn't just a casual indiscretion, it was a profound betrayal of trust between two men, a secret that threatened to unravel not only their professional relationship but also the delicate fabric of our intertwined lives. But where did that leave me? What was I supposed to do with this devastating information? I sat there in stunned silence, Daniel's confession pressing down on me like a suffocating cloud, my mind spinning, desperately trying to make sense of the impossible situation. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him not as the confident, authoritative boss I had encountered at company events, but as a flawed human being, a man who had made a significant mistake, a mistake that had the potential to shatter so many lives, including his own. "I don't know if I can help you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. This is so much to take in. I don't know what you're expecting from me, but I'm just Robert's wife. I can't fix this for you." Daniel's face hardened momentarily, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his features, but it quickly softened again, as if he were trying to gauge my reaction, to understand the sheer impossibility of his request. "You're right," he murmured, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. "I shouldn't have put this on you. But you're the only one who knows Robert the way I do. I needed to tell someone. I don't even know how to live with myself right now." The raw vulnerability in his voice, the palpable weight of his pain, was almost too much to bear. It was as if he had shed his carefully constructed facade, revealing a side of himself I had never glimpsed before. He wasn't just the confident, successful boss anymore, he was a man drowning in the consequences of his own choices. I took a deep, steadying breath. "You've got to tell him eventually, Daniel. You can't keep this secret forever." Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if the weight of his actions was too heavy to bear. "I know. But I don't know if I can face him after everything. I've been lying to him for months, Evelyn. I don't even know if I can ever fix this." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick, the silence that followed almost suffocating, as if the very room had become trapped in the suffocating tension between us. I didn't know what to say next. What comfort could I possibly offer to a man who had made such a grave mistake, a man who had just confessed to something so devastating, knowing full well it could tear his world apart? Maybe you need to take a step back," I suggested cautiously, feeling the weight of my own inadequate words. "You need some time to think about what you really want, Daniel. I know Robert. He's a good man. If you truly care about him, you need to figure out how to tell him, even if it's the hardest thing you've ever done." Daniel's eyes met mine, a flicker of something akin to hope shining through the despair that clouded his features. "You think he'll ever forgive me?" I wasn't sure if I had an answer to that profound question. Forgiveness was a complex and deeply personal journey. It wasn't something that could be granted easily or quickly. It required time, understanding, and a genuine willingness to rebuild what had been broken. "I can't say for certain, Daniel," I replied softly, choosing my words carefully. "But I know Robert. He's a man of honor. He values loyalty above all else. If you show him that you're truly remorseful, and if you give him the time and space he needs, maybe there's a chance." Daniel leaned back, his hand gripping the edge of the sofa as he processed my hesitant words. His brow was furrowed in deep thought, and for a moment, I could see him wrestling with his own guilt and fear, the immense weight of his betrayal. It was clear that he didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since he had walked through my door, I saw a fragile glimmer of hope flicker in his eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you right now, Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice laced with a raw vulnerability. "You've been more of a friend to me in this moment than I deserve." I shook my head slightly, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over me. "I'm not your friend, Daniel. I'm Robert's wife. I'm trying to help him. And in the process, I'm trying to help you too." We sat in silence for a long while, each lost in our own turbulent thoughts. The room felt heavy with the weight of the devastating secret Daniel had shared, but there was something else in the air too, something unspoken, something that felt like the fragile beginning of a new, albeit painful, understanding. Finally, Daniel stood up, straightening his suit jacket with a deep, weary sigh. "I should go. Robert's probably wondering where I am. I don't want him to get suspicious." I nodded, feeling the tension in my own body slowly begin to ease. "I'll be here, Daniel. But you need to make things right. You can't keep running from this." He gave me a small, almost rueful smile. "You're right. I'll figure it out, Evelyn. I don't know what the next step is, but I'll take it. As he walked towards the door, a profound sense of unease settled over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But there was something within me, a fragile hope, that wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could eventually be repaired. Daniel had made a significant mistake, a deep betrayal, but we all had our moments of weakness, our lapses in judgment. The crucial question was whether he could find the strength, the genuine remorse, to mend what had been so carelessly broken. When the door finally closed behind him, I found myself standing alone in the quiet of the living room, the weight of his confession settling heavily upon me. What would happen next? Could I help my husband navigate this impending storm? Would Robert ever truly forgive Daniel? And more importantly, could we all somehow move forward from this devastating moment? I didn't have the answers, but for the first time in a long while, I realized something profoundly important. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do isn't just facing the truth, but living with the often painful consequences of it. And the path forward, whatever it might look like, would undoubtedly require time, immense patience, and a whole lot of heart. The days that followed Daniel's shocking confession were a blur, filled with a strange, pervasive tension that clung to me like a persistent shadow. I went through the familiar motions of my daily routine, cooking meals, tidying the house, offering Robert quiet support with his work, but beneath the surface of normalcy, everything had shifted, irrevocably altered by the weight of the secret I now carried. I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel and the immense burden of his guilt, but even more so, my thoughts were consumed by Robert, my steadfast husband, the man who trusted me implicitly, the man who remained completely unaware of the devastating truth that had been confided in me. Every time I looked at him, a deep ache resonated in my chest, a painful mix of guilt for keeping Daniel's secret and a gnawing fear of the inevitable fallout when the truth finally surfaced. Would it shatter our carefully constructed life? Could we ever truly rebuild what was broken? The answers remained elusive, shrouded in a cloud of uncertainty, but one thing was undeniably clear: I had to be there for Robert, my unwavering commitment now tested by an unforeseen and unwelcome burden. It was late one night, the silence of our home amplifying the unspoken tension that had been growing between Robert and me, that the weight of the situation finally became too much to bear. Robert had been uncharacteristically distant in recent days, a subtle withdrawal that cast a pall over our evenings. We had settled down to watch a movie together, a familiar ritual of shared quiet time, but his mind seemed to be elsewhere, his gaze flickering over the screen without truly registering the images. Every attempt I made to engage him in conversation was met with a distracted reply, his thoughts clearly preoccupied. "Robert," I said gently, my voice cutting through the strained silence, "is everything all right?" He paused, his hand frozen midair as he reached for the remote control. I could see the subtle strain etched on his face, the furrow in his brow, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders. For a fleeting moment, I braced myself for a dismissive shrug, a familiar deflection. But instead, he slowly set the remote down and turned to face me, his gaze holding a troubled intensity. "I've been thinking about Daniel," he said quietly, his voice low and thoughtful. "He's been acting strange lately, hasn't he?" A lump formed in my throat, a sudden constriction that stole my breath. My heart pounded against my ribs as I frantically searched for the right words, a carefully constructed response that would deflect his growing suspicion without resorting to a blatant lie. This was it, the moment I had been dreading, the inevitable point where the carefully guarded secret threatened to unravel. I had to tell him something, but what should I reveal? The truth, in its entirety, felt too catastrophic, too likely to detonate the fragile peace we were attempting to maintain. Yet, to offer a flimsy fabrication felt equally treacherous, a further entanglement in the web of deceit. "Yeah," I replied carefully, striving for a casual tone that belied the turmoil within. "He's been a little off lately. I'm sure it's nothing." Robert offered a small, knowing smile, but there was a disquieting sharpness in his eyes that sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. "I don't know, Evelyn. I've worked with him for years, and I've never seen him like this. I'm starting to wonder if something's going on. If maybe I'm not seeing the full picture." His words hit me like a physical blow, a sharp, unexpected pain in my chest. He was starting to suspect something, a disquieting intuition that threatened to pierce the carefully constructed wall of my silence. The thought of him stumbling upon the truth, piecing together the fragments of Daniel's strange behavior and my own guarded responses, filled me with a cold dread. I had to find a way to reassure him, to steer him away from the precipice of discovery. "Robert, you're overthinking it," I said, attempting a tone of confident dismissal that felt hollow even to my own ears. "Daniel's been under a lot of pressure lately with work and everything. Maybe he just needs some time to adjust. You know how he is." But Robert remained unconvinced. He looked at me, his gaze piercing, as if searching for a hidden truth in the depths of my eyes. "I don't know, Evelyn. Something's not right. I can feel it. And I think Daniel's hiding something from me. He's always been the kind of guy who doesn't show his hand, but I've known him long enough to tell when something's off." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth, or at least a crucial crossroads. Do I confess everything, unleashing the devastating secret that had been entrusted to me? Do I continue to protect Daniel's fragile confidence, further entangling myself in a web of deceit? Or do I allow Robert's growing suspicions to lead him down a potentially more painful path of discovery? Before I could formulate a coherent response, Robert stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm going to call him. I need to talk to him." "Robert, wait," I exclaimed, rising to my feet, my hand instinctively reaching out to grip his arm, my fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Don't do it. Not like this." He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a confusing blend of concern and frustration. "Why not? If there's something going on, I need to know. I need to fix it." "I know," I whispered, my voice shaking uncontrollably, "but maybe there's a better way to handle this. Please. Just give it some time." He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, his gaze searching mine as if weighing my desperate plea against his own gnawing instincts. Finally, a sigh escaped his lips, a visible release of tension as his shoulders slumped in resignation. "I don't understand, Evelyn. Why are you being so protective of him?" I felt the sting of tears welling up in my eyes, a painful acknowledgement of the untenable position I had allowed myself to be placed in. I blinked them back, refusing to succumb to the overwhelming wave of guilt and fear. Because I know what he's going through. I know what he's hiding." Robert's gaze softened, a flicker of alarm replacing the frustration as he took a hesitant step towards me, his face etched with concern. "Evelyn. What's going on? What do you know?" I closed my eyes, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. I wanted to tell him everything, to unburden myself of the crushing weight of Daniel's confession. But the words remained trapped in my throat, choked by a fear of the unknown consequences. The truth was so much more complicated, so much more potentially damaging, than I had ever imagined, and I wasn't sure if Robert, our marriage, could withstand its full impact. "I can't say, Robert," I whispered, my voice barely audible, a broken plea for understanding. "Not yet. Please. Just trust me for a little while longer." He nodded slowly, a deep furrow remaining in his brow, the doubt still clearly lingering in his eyes. "I don't like this, Evelyn. I don't like not knowing." "I know," I said softly, my hand reaching out to tentatively touch his arm, "but sometimes there are things we need to work through on our own before we share them with others." Robert stood there for another long moment, his eyes fixed on mine, searching for a reassurance I couldn't fully offer. Finally, he sighed deeply and pulled me into a tight embrace. I clung to him, the familiar warmth of his arms a temporary solace in the storm brewing around us. For a brief, fleeting moment, everything felt safe again, the familiar comfort of our connection a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this fragile peace wouldn't last. The truth, like an unstoppable tide, was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. The days that followed our strained conversation passed in a haze of palpable unease. I could sense the subtle strain that had settled between Robert and me, a delicate tension that permeated the quiet evenings we spent together. He was trying, I could see the effort in his forced smiles and overly attentive gestures, but something within me kept pulling me back, a constant, nagging reminder of the devastating secret I continued to harbor. Every time I looked at him, the weight of Daniel's confession pressed down on my chest, creating an invisible barrier between us. The air in our home felt thick with unspoken words, with the heavy silence of a truth waiting to be revealed, and I knew, with a growing sense of dread, that we couldn't continue to navigate this treacherous landscape of half-truths and carefully constructed facades for much longer. It wasn't until a week later, on a rainy Thursday evening that mirrored the tempest brewing within me, that things finally reached their inevitable breaking point. Robert had returned from work, his usual exhaustion compounded by a palpable tension that hung about him like a heavy cloak. He seemed distracted, his mind clearly preoccupied with something I couldn't quite decipher. When he walked into the living room, his usual greeting was absent, his thoughts seemingly tethered to some unseen concern. I stood up from the couch, my pulse quickening with a sense of foreboding. "Robert? Is everything all right?" I asked, striving for a steady tone that belied the frantic beating of my heart. He turned to face me, and I could see the raw conflict etched on his face, the troubled depths in his eyes. "I talked to Daniel today," he said, his voice low and heavy, each word laden with a significance that made my blood run cold. He finally admitted it. The air in the room seemed to solidify, the familiar comfort of our living space suddenly feeling alien and hostile. I froze, my heart plummeting into the pit of my stomach. My worst fears had materialized. Robert had learned the truth. I desperately tried to mask the wave of panic that threatened to engulf me, but I'm sure the tremor in my hands, the sudden pallor of my face, betrayed my carefully constructed composure. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that felt both accusatory and deeply wounded. "He told me about the promotion he was offering me. He told me that you were the one who told him I'd been considering it. And..." Well, Robert's voice cracked, the carefully constructed composure finally fracturing. "He told me a lot more than that. About everything that happened between you two." I felt the floor drop out from beneath me, the familiar stability of my world dissolving into a chaotic abyss. The words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory, each syllable a painful shard piercing my carefully constructed defenses. It wasn't just the promotion, the seemingly innocuous gesture of professional advancement. It wasn't just Daniel's sudden, urgent request for my private counsel. It was all of it, the hushed conversation in my living room, the weeks of palpable tension, the carefully guarded emotions that had been building between us like an invisible wall. The devastating secret I had been carrying, the burden of Daniel's confession, was no longer mine to keep. The truth, in its raw and brutal entirety, had finally been exposed. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking, the dam of my carefully controlled emotions finally giving way. Tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging. "I should have told you. I didn't want to hurt you, Robert. I never meant for any of this to happen." He remained silent for a long, agonizing moment, his eyes never leaving mine, his gaze a complex tapestry of pain, confusion, and a dawning understanding. Finally, he took another step forward and reached for my hand, his touch surprisingly gentle amidst the emotional wreckage. "I don't know what to say, Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I also understand, in a way. I know how Daniel can be. He can be convincing, persuasive. But I never thought it would go this far. I never thought it would involve you. I didn't want to get involved," I choked out, my voice trembling uncontrollably. But he was going through something. I didn't know how to say no. And when he told me everything, I felt this sense of responsibility. Like I had to help him. "But I never meant to betray you, Robert. Never." Robert squeezed my hand, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, confusion, sadness, a deep, abiding pain. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you for this, Evelyn," he admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of his hurt. "But I'm willing to try. We've been through a lot together, and I know this wasn't easy for you either. But we have to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets." I nodded, tears streaming freely down my face, a silent promise etched in my heart. "I know, Robert. I know." He pulled me into a tight embrace, and I clung to him, the familiar warmth of his arms a fragile anchor in the storm that had just broken over our lives. In that moment, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, guilt, shame, a sliver of relief that the truth was finally out in the open. It had taken so long for us to reach this painful precipice, and now that we were here, teetering on the edge of an uncertain future, I wasn't sure what lay ahead. But one thing was certain: our relationship had been forever changed by the devastating secret that had finally come to light. A few days later, the fragile quiet of our home was broken by the unexpected ring of the phone. It was Daniel. I hadn't heard from him since that devastating night, and a part of me had wondered if I would ever speak to him again. When I picked up the phone, his voice was soft, filled with a remorse that sounded genuine. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said, the words barely above a whisper. "I never meant for things to go this far. I should have never put you in that position. I don't know what I was thinking." I didn't know what to say to him. He was the man who had crossed a line, who had placed me in the middle of a situation I never wanted to be a part of. But in that moment, amidst the lingering pain and confusion, I recognized something profound. He was just as lost, just as flawed, as I had been in navigating this treacherous situation. We had both made choices that had led us down this painful path, and we could never truly undo what had happened. "I can't fix this, Daniel," I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. "And I can't be a part of whatever it is you're trying to do anymore. But I hope you can find your way back." A long, heavy silence stretched across the phone line before he finally spoke again, his voice thick with a weary resignation. "I understand, Evelyn. I really do. I'll never forget what you did for me. But I know I have to move on. I wanted you to know that." And with that, the conversation ended, the line going dead, leaving me standing alone with the weight of his final words. A strange mix of sadness and a profound sense of relief washed over me. Daniel had made his choices, and I had made mine. Now, all that was left was to navigate the difficult path of rebuilding my life, of repairing the fractured bond I shared with Robert, and to somehow find a way to move forward. It wasn't easy. The days that followed were filled with tentative conversations, painful admissions, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding trust. Robert and I still had a long and challenging journey ahead of us, but we were learning to be open with each other, to communicate with a newfound honesty, stripped bare of fear and pretense. And though the future remained uncertain, shrouded in the lingering shadows of betrayal and forgiveness, I knew, deep down, that we were stronger for having finally faced the devastating truth together. As for Daniel, I hadn't seen him since that final phone call. I didn't know what the future held for him, and in that moment, I realized I didn't need to. He had his own path to follow, his own consequences to face, and I had mine. And through it all, through the pain and the uncertainty, I had learned something invaluable: the enduring importance of honesty, the arduous yet essential strength of forgiveness, and the undeniable power of moving forward, even when the world around you seems to be crumbling. Life wasn't perfect, our relationship scarred by the events of the past few weeks, but it was ours, a testament to the enduring power of love and the difficult, often painful, journey of navigating the complexities of the human heart. And for that, amidst the lingering ache and the uncertain future, I found a fragile, but persistent, sense of gratitude.